Idle Talk with Ron Zima, Idle Free Guy, helping fleets cut costs and look like heroes. Hey, everybody. It's a lot of fun always to talk to my next guest. And does he ever have a lot of perspective, a lot of experience? My good friend, Rick's Longobart with Longobart-Ross Consulting. Rick's, welcome. And we've got some really timely stuff to talk about, specifically about the cost of tech time as it relates to idle time. And so you've put some notes together for me, and I've studied those. We've also got a couple of graphics that we'll be speaking to. So first off, welcome, my friend. Good to see you.
Thank you, Ron. Thanks for having us back. We appreciate it. Always great talking to you, always working with you. Glad to be associated to Go Green's communication.
Well, thank you. And by the way, I should also mention that Longobart-Ross is an affiliate of Go Green and Industry's Idle Reduction Behavior Modification Program. Now, there's some big payback to be realized here by reducing idle. Rick, why don't you just give us a quick overview, top of mind, so if the government fleet reduces idling, what's the result?
Yeah, absolutely, Ronnie. And great question. And it's something that we can't necessarily measure because we don't see it from a meter reading on our dash. But the biggest factor towards controlling idling is if you take into content that every time you idle a vehicle over time, that results into miles driven on your vehicle or hours being used. All that equates, Ron, to miles being driven. We maintain our vehicles based on the miles that we drive and the cost associated to ownership. And so by idling a vehicle only results into using that vehicle more than you anticipated. That means that if you were to look at the maintenance cost, a lot of those maintenance costs are because the vehicle's idling too long. And if we could identify how much of that is idle time, we can safely say that those vehicles need to be PM'd more often, preventative maintenance. That means you need more staffing. It means the costs are higher. That means the life cycles are shorter because we're not equating for the idle time when we have a vehicle that's idling anywhere between 40 to 60% of its life cycle. A big number.
So how common is idle of 40 to 60%?
It's an epidemic. It's idle to those numbers nationwide. I mean, there may be some fleets maybe on the West Coast that are more progressive, but for the most part, nationwide, you're seeing vehicles idling way too much based on the type of behavior and type of vehicles that they're designed to do.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so looking at your notes here, it says that preventative maintenance, which is generally every 3,000 miles. So that's 1 to 2 preventative maintenance inspections per year, depending on the class of vehicle. So, this all connects to a very hot topic right now, and that is technicians, the availability of technicians. And so let's talk about the metrics here. If you're idling 40 to 60% of engine hours, how does that impact on preventative maintenance and the amount of time techs need to be on the shop addressing this problem?
Yeah, absolutely. And without going into a full blown into the weeds of the costs associated to ownership, if we just look at the generic, hey, a vehicle requires X amount of maintenance per year, and we look at that times the amount of vehicles that a fleet may own, and if we did the math of how many vehicles times how many required hours, that gives us the total amount of cumulative hours required to maintain a fleet over the course of, let's say, a year, right? there needs to be X amount of available technical hours in order to support those required manufactured maintenance costs. And what happens, Ron, is that as a vehicle idles more, that means the maintenance cost accelerates. That means you need to have more technicians because you can't keep up with the demand because maintenance costs are skyrocketing and PMs need to be done more often because idling is a clear relation to miles driven. So you have to be careful about how many technicians you claim an organization may need because it may be false. Because if you're not taking into the account of idling being 50% of its life cycle, you're underestimating the amount of technicians you need. And with the shortage that there is today, we can't keep up with the demands under normal circumstances, let alone adding to the additional mile or additional times that vehicle is idling.
Yeah, and to give some further perspective on the just mind-blowing metrics here, Ricks, you may recall a graphic, and I'll put it up on the screen here, but in a fleet of 1,000, which is not unusual for a municipal agency in the US, and 2 hours of idle, we did the math, and basically you wind up with an additional 15 million miles over the course of a year for a fleet of 1,000. Now, further into the numbers here, it says from your notes here, and I quote, technicians on average have 1,420 hours of wrench turning time available per year, and vehicles, of course, depending on their class, get X amount of maintenance hours to be properly maintained. So, and then you refer to this wrench turning time and that sort of dynamic as vehicle equivalency units or VEUs. So let's talk about that so people can wrap their heads around this. So let's say you've got 50% driver idling on your engines. How does that impact VEUs?
Well, a simple explanation of that, Ron, is that you're determining your vehicle equivalency hours to maintenance, right? Preventative, predictable maintenance. Now you throw in unscheduled repairs, meaning breakdowns, comebacks, or failures due to over idling a vehicle. That means you have to now maintain not only your predictability with maintenance, but now you've got to manage your unpredictability, right? And a lot of that is the results of just idling. And so as those unpredictable times increase, you don't have enough technicians to properly maintain a vehicle and do the maintenance. So therefore, that only alludes to one thing: is you have to hire more staff to properly maintain those vehicles. That's due to the excessive idling.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
it's a numbers game, right? You have so many hours available. You have so many required hours. You simply divide the required hours by the available hours, and that tells you how many technicians an organization needs. And that is for a fixed amount. So as we continue to have unknown numbers due to breakdowns and idling, that means we can only supplement that by two ways, and that is by adding more staff to our organization, or we may need to outsource some of the overflow work that we can't manage or can't repair. That means usually when you're outsourcing, you're usually spending more money to send it to a third party opposed to having in-house staff do those repairs, which ultimately means you're spending more money to have additional work done.
Okay, so let's think about this for a second. What happens if you haven't got the resources, you haven't got the technicians? Okay, what happens then? Is this where vehicles start to line up in the garage or out in the yard and they're not being used and they're actually down because you can't get the tech time? Is that what happens?
That is a safe analogy, and that's exactly what happens. And I would say you're probably just going to end up with very unhappy customers, right? And I know we're going to get to another screenshot where it shows utilization, and
Yeah.
so
Should I? Hey, let's pull that up. You want me to pull that up?
Absolutely, please do.
Okay, so here's the graphic.
And so what we find, Ron, is that a vehicle is estimated to travel a certain amount of miles or hours based on its life cycle. And when a vehicle does not reach that plateau, then you ultimately have a vehicle that's underutilized. And so oftentimes we have found that those vehicles are not hitting the predicted miles traveled through its life cycles because 50% of it is idle.
Oh, yeah,
Right.
that's
And
the
so we're
that's
not
yeah, that's your the term I've often heard is high idle, low mileage, right?
low miles, right? And so we have a vehicle that's not being productive for the most part under normal situations. And so what Profit Software does is it allows us to determine how many miles is driving throughout the course of its life cycle or throughout the course of the month or a year. And we can do analytics by looking at those miles driven. And what we find is that a lot of it is contributed to idling. And so maybe there's an opportunity for vehicle reduction if we were to make a vehicle more productive opposed to less idling and more actually proactive of work, right? So you can potentially A, reduce your fleet size, B, stay static or look at reducing the amount of technicians that you need, all results into reduced cost, reduced salaries, reduced tailpipe emissions.
Yeah, no kidding. Just by turning the key off and getting
Mhm.
drivers to care about their
Absolutely.
idling beliefs and behavior, which we know how to do really well. And your software knows how to really, like you say, get into the weeds very quickly to make sense of those weeds. And I guess if you were to pull back on this a little bit in terms of context, I would say that, I've heard it said George Servant, a good friend of mine. You know George. He's somebody who's been in the business of fleet management for certainly as long as you have, and he's got that perspective. And he's basically said that because of high idle, low mileage, what's happening is it's destroying the bathtub curve of the total cost of ownership on any particular vehicle. So it's flattening it out. What would you say to that?
Absolutely, absolutely. And with telematics now becoming a common stay, is we can see that now, right? And so we're starting to change the learning curve of what really is happening by idling a vehicle, where we may not have seen that before, right? We've heard of it before, but we couldn't put our fingers on it. Now with telematics and your product run and profit software, we can actually see it come to light, right? We can
Yeah.
actually see the numbers. We can actually see what it's actually doing to the vehicle and to the maintenance cost overall.
And we
It's
can
quite
do and we can do something about it. We can start building an idle reduction culture, which wow. You think about that. I mean, most people just don't know that. Taxpayers don't know that. The general populace doesn't know that 50% of the time in a lot of these municipal government fleet agencies, that engine time when it's running could be saved. And it's at the very top of the list, we've seen um, in the cascade of costs, fuel as the primary number one uh, way to measure, as well as a cost. However, now we can see that actually the downstream costs, such as total cost of ownership and all of these extra miles, these extra PMs, the extra techs, the downtime is it's going to dwarf the cost of fuel from driver idling behavior. What would you say to that?
absolutely. Hey, like this stuff flows into our personal life. Let's not be fooled. Uh, we're doing this for the better half of fleets across America, in North America, but this also flows into our personal life. I can't tell you the amount of days I go into a shopping center or mall, and just in the parking lot, I pull up to a vehicle and I get out, and that vehicle is just sitting there idling. and you can tell it's been idling for some time. And a mild day climate, that vehicle's got the windows rolled down and the vehicle running.
Right.
It doesn't make any sense. I mean, a lot of it is education, a lot of it is myth, a lot of it is just poorly managed the way we own our vehicles, and we need to make those changes in society.
Yeah. Well, and at the very top level, I think what we need is policy, and the politicians really treating this as not something trivial, but for the enormous opportunity it represents for, squeezing out costs as well as carbon in our transportation systems. So we really need those policymakers to step up, because that's where policy turns into government action, as you know, Rix. So this is really really informative. I know that a lot of people are going to be paying closer attention to the metric with conversations like this. Rix, I really want to thank you for just this great information, because information is power, as you know. And I'm a prime example. I mean, before I was the idle free guy, I was the idle guy, right? I was the Canadian idler. Okay, American idler. Okay.
Right.
So same thing. It's the same thing, but I was clocking anywhere between 200 and 250 engine hours a year. Now there's people, if you go into a parking lot, a retail parking lot, which I do, and I see, 30, 40 cars, typically in a 300 vehicle lot, what have you. And then that's multiplied 1,000 times over the city. It's a big deal. It's a really big deal. But what people don't understand is they have no context. They're like I was. Hey, nobody's ever added this all up. Nobody's ever told me why I should care.
Right.
The sort of effect this will have on air quality for my kids around their schools, which are idling hot zones, for my cars, what it does to my personal vehicle. So we were just talking about fleet vehicles, but your personal vehicle. This is what's truly exciting with our program and our partnership is that the employees are going to save a whack of money and carbon and exhaust pollution at home around their communities and take better care of their vehicles, right? And then cash wise, when you've got to do the math and the idle free calculator within our program, wow. And you come to understand that, hey, I'm going to save $1,200 at today's prices in my personal F-150. And by the way, we have 3 other cars in the family driveway, right? So anyway.
Yep. Yep. If there's not a better description of time is money, this is it, right? And every time you idle a vehicle to that previous screen showing, I think the 6,000 some odd dollars uh, over the life of the vehicle, a lot of that is alluded to time and not necessarily miles. So those maintenance costs are related to your 50% of the vehicle being idle. And so we can cut those costs down, and by identifying the maintenance cost in respect to how many miles are on the vehicle, needs to be an equal balance. So if I've got a vehicle that's costing me $6,000, but I've put on 200,000 miles, I'm okay with that because I can clearly in that previous screen share with you the amount of miles in relationship to the cost. But if I have a vehicle that's costing me 6 to 8,000, but my miles are really low because I'm underutilized, more than likely those maintenance costs are contributing to the improper use of that vehicle.
Right.
And human
Exactly.
behavior, right? So that puts any content into the relationship to meter to maintenance costs, which Profit Software easily identifies. We can probably allude to the fact that it's because of over idling the vehicle.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Rix, I really appreciate you and your perspective. Let's talk just quickly before we close out here. Where can people find Profit Software online? Give us a little bit of a plug here.
Absolutely. If you go to our website, Longobart-Ross.com, you'll find all information about our consulting services as well as Profit Software. You can also reach me directly at my phone number at 949-943-0334. or you can email me and you'll find our contents and our email addresses on our website, Ron.
Fantastic. All right, my friend. Hats off to you. I'll keep mine on because I think I'll get. Yeah, no, I think I'll keep mine on. Idle Talk with Ron Zima, Idle Free Guy, helping fleets cut costs and look like heroes.